Welcome to ProtoPie London Meetup. Obviously, it's not just London people here. We've got people from all around the world. Just a quick thank you to the sponsors. So that would be Navoda. They were there with us for our first ProtoPie Meetup in London. That was an in-person meetup. I guess at the end of this session, we would have done more online meetups than in-person meetups. So thanks to them for coming along for the journey with us. And our other sponsor is ProtoPilot, and that's my co-organizer, Darren, his YouTube channel. So he kind of does some tutorials for beginners and advanced users of ProtoPie. So go check that out. Darren, if you want to share the link for that in the chat window so people can jump off and take a look at that.
Sure.
And we'll be kickstarting with Robert. I'll let Robert do an intro, a little bit about him, kind of work he's up to, and then he's going to be talking about variables. That'll be followed by Darren and then Fredo. So I'll stop sharing. Robert, and if you want to take over.
Thank you, Chris. So my name is Robert. I'm a product designer in a company that does esports. So in my daily routine, I really use ProtoPie because I really need to test my designs. So I used to use other different prototyping tools, but what ProtoPie gave me is something like I can try anything I want, any idea I want with ProtoPie. So in my daily routine as a designer, I have prototyping going on. So today I'm going to show you if you can see the screen, right? So I'm going to talk about variables and what you can do with variables. So I will introduce a little bit about ProtoPie and how.
Robert,
yeah.
Interrupt. We can't see if you're screen sharing.
Wait a second. I think you need to enable the screen sharing for me.
Oh, sorry. Yeah.
Yeah.
Can you get it now?
Yeah.
Cool. Sorry about that.
Yeah. So I will do a quick sort of introduction about ProtoPie for the people that are new to ProtoPie. I know that some of the attendees already know what is ProtoPie. So ProtoPie is a prototyping tool that allows you to import from any of the design tools like Adobe XD, Figma, or Sketch. And if you want quicker prototyping, like you have an idea and you want to prototype it, you can directly design in ProtoPie and prototype it. So basically the interface is really easy. You just import your file from here. Let's say I have this for today. I just have this 4 screens and I have imported it to this scene. So you have the scenes here and you have the components over here and you have the variables over here. And what you can do is add actions, triggers, and responses to them. So basically, what ProtoPie lets you do is add action that are, let's say if you're doing mobile, that they are native mobile actions, and the responses are native mobile. If you do web, you can do also like the hover effect and so on. So what we have here now, you can see the preview or not? Yes.
We can't see the preview window, no.
Yeah, because I need to share the whole screen, that's why. Okay. Now I think you can see the.
Yeah, we can see.
Yeah. Okay. So wait a second. Okay. So here, whenever you import your stuff, you need to know what you want to move. Let's say there are stuff that you just import from your design files. You need to rework them in the ProtoPie to make some stuff, some changes to it. Like the rectangle, if you want to change the color, you need to add a new rectangle from ProtoPie so that you can do changes to it. So what we have here is a group of transactions that are scrolling, and there's a trigger to it. Whenever I click on it on down, there's the scaling, as you can see. And whenever I move the card, I get the actions. So now you can see, today I will cover the code and adding money to the card. So here, the pin code, we don't have any pin codes because there's no the lock thing. So let's start with the real stuff. So I will get the message to create the pin code for the card, and I will create the pin code. Let's say I will put 3333 and confirm. And whenever I want to like deposit money, he will ask me for the code. And if I put like 4344, it's wrong pin code. And let's try 1221, wrong pin code. So the correct pin code is 3333 in order to let you in to add money. And whenever, let's say we want to add 300, as we know there is 300 in it, so it will add to the card. So in other prototyping tools, this is nearly not impossible, but this logic of having a real product feel is somehow one of the good things about ProtoPie, and you can achieve all this using components and variables. If you don't want them to be dynamic, you can do it without the variables also. But to have a dynamic prototype, you can use the variables. So let me start with what I did here. So I have two variables. So let me tell you what are variables. Variables are like blank objects. Wait a second. Okay, that can include number, text, or color. So let's see what is scroll indicator. Scroll indicator, in fact, is showing me where my scroll is. Because in this example, I'm just making the height of the card smaller, affected by the scroll. So I just need to know where my scroll is so that I can add the trigger to it. So here you can see the range. So I'm telling if my scroll group, which is this transaction scroll, is greater than or equal to 30, do these actions. So these actions are like the text will move to 15, Y, the box will resize, the height of blue will become 100. In fact, it is at first, it is 180. So whenever I add this range, ProtoPie will act responsively. So whenever we're more than 30, the card will do the trick. So this is the first role of the variable that you can use to know the scroll where you are whenever you're scrolling. And let me tell you how you can achieve this. So we have a scroll group, which is the transaction. We're adding a detect to it, detect scroll, and we're assigning it to the scroll indicator. And then we have this line of code, which is somehow, we should not be afraid of it because we can add it by plus. Like ProtoPie can guide you through all of it, like scroll group dot scroll offset. It's there. You don't have to type anything. You don't have to memorize anything. But you can, if you want to do complex functions, formulas, you can go to the website of ProtoPie. There are plenty of formulas you can use. So this is the simplest form of using this variable to save the scroll of the transaction scroll. Okay. So secondly, I have here, wait a second, let me turn off this. Turn on the pin code. Okay. So we have the create pin code where I'm typing the code and confirm, and the variable is saving whatever I'm typing. So the input is saving when on click of the confirm button, or return if you want to use, but return will be like a web function. On confirm, the pin code will be saved in the variable called pin code. So whenever I want to reuse it, I just want to tell if this input is equal to the variable, let's say 3331, this is not equal to the variable that is saved, just show me the wrong pin code message. This wrong pin code message is something that is prepared. If we want to see, I can show it to you. Wait a second. Okay. You can see here in the design, we have the pin code ready. So what I did here is change the color. You can use opacity if you want, but there are plenty of ways of doing it. I just put white, and on if the message is wrong, it turns into red. If the message is right, it turns into green. So let's try it here. Okay. Create pin code 1111. Confirm, it's saved. And whenever I want to deposit, I'm asking the input to check if the pin code is equal to the variable over here, which is 1111. I get correct pin code. If it's not correct, it will show wrong pin code. So how I achieved this? Well, I used a component, honestly, for this, because I wanted to reuse this element. That's why you can either use component or not. It's the same concept. It won't differ. We can see here. Okay. Wait a second. So we can see here, if the pin code text, which is this, is equal to the pin code that is saved, change the color. If it's not equal, sorry, if it's not equal to the pin code, change the color to red, and change the text to wrong pin code. So whatever text you have, you can also change it. Like I change it to wrong pin code. If the condition, if the pin code input is equal to the variable, just change it to green and highlight the deposit button, make it opacity 100 because it's somehow it's on 19, and here and here I'm saying if the pin code is less than or equal to 3, just keep the text white, so that it doesn't pop up whenever you just type 3 wrong passcodes. So whenever it's less than or equal to 3 characters, it just keeps the text white so that it doesn't appear, and we don't need this. So at the end of this workshop, I will just put this file on the cloud so that you can try it yourself. As you can see here, let's try it again. 44433 pin code. We want to add 4433 deposit money. We want to add 125, 425. So as we can see here, it just adds to the money. So how to do that? Let's see. Okay, so we're saying, let's see how we add the 300 on deposit money. Whenever we're tapping on deposit money, the condition, if the text equals to transfer money, we're adding this formula. It's an easy formula where it says number of amount.text, which is this, the 300 that we actually have, plus number of what we input, which is the input. And it will show whatever we have, whatever number we have. So let's say we have 111 and the pin code is right. It lets me in. I add 325 or 249. It directly adds to the 300. So this way you will have a super dynamic prototype with mobile. Let's say if you're working on a mobile banking, this will be super useful, because I used to work in a mobile banking where we used to show stakeholders functionalities like this, and they didn't really understand until they try and see it themselves and try it themselves. Another thing is you can add a lot of conditions. Let's say if I'm just adding, just a second. As we can see here, there's no lock. So whenever we're adding a pin code, we can see that the pin code is locked. So you can do really nice micro interactions. You can work on details. And it's super fast. You can just try it on your phone. And it's super effective for people that do really need functionalities like this. I think I'm done with my prototype. I will add it to the cloud and so that anyone can use it and try it themselves. You can even download it and just see whatever is going on. I just have two screens over here because I wanted at first to have the normal interaction, and then the application just asks me if I want to add pin code to the card. That's why I have two screens over here. If not, it's not two different screens. Actually, it's the beginning, and then the application just asks me if I want the pin code. Okay, Chris.
Cool. Thanks, Robert. It's really great to hear from you. I know you're a very active member on the ProtoPioneers Slack channel. So for anyone who doesn't know, the ProtoPioneers is a group who kind of are in close conversation with the team at ProtoPie and kind of sharing ideas and prototypes, and if they have problems, kind of come back and chat. So it's good to hear from you. These things that you've just shown are exactly the kind of things like when I first saw ProtoPie that I got excited about, and the prototyping tools that I was previously using didn't even come close to being able to do those kind of things. So it's really good to see the different ways that you've been creating stuff. And I think you said something about there being plenty of different ways to do things. And for me, I find it really interesting how other people do stuff, because it's like the platform is very flexible. You can do things in many different ways. Like in other tools, there's like different ways to do it. Someone might do it this way, you can do it that way, but you can achieve the same effect. But what I find really interesting is digging down into that and see which is the most efficient way. So sometimes I've done something in a certain way, and then I'll see, oh, this person's done it like that was really
or
great.
the way that is closer to the real production life. Like if you work with developers, there's the right way to do it. Let's say if you cooperate with the developers, you can see like how they are really applying this effect. So you can just use that thing in ProtoPie. As we know, we have some engineers in ProtoPioneers that really help us in this kind of situations.
Cool. We'll move on to Darren. I'll just say that we'll do a Q&A session. We'll keep all the questions until the end. So if anyone does have questions, just stick them into the QA panel, and we'll get to that at the end. Darren, do you want to jump in?
Yeah, sure. Share. Cool. Can you see my screen? Great. Okay. So I'm going to talk about components. So components have been something that was added a few versions ago. Initially, in a situation where you could just add like a single component, so you couldn't do nested components. And then recently, I think it was, Fredo can correct me, 4.3 or 4.2, we added nested components. So now we can build any kind of UI components, and we can nest components infinitely. But there's some using components, you need to think in a slightly different way to what you would normally do if you were just building vanilla UI in ProtoPie. So I'm just going to take you through how components work and hopefully demystify some of the potentially confusing aspects of them. Okay, so this is all going to be within ProtoPie. No boring keynote slides. I did this talk actually with keynote slides, and I think I actually put some designers to sleep. So hopefully this will be a bit more fun and interesting. So there's the main thing about components is how components can talk to different parts of your prototype. So there's different what ProtoPie calls channels, which is different destinations you can send messages. So messages are the kind of main mechanism for sending messages is the main mechanism for kind of making interaction happen. So if you can imagine that I've got a kind of self-contained component, like a button or a radio set or something like that, and I want to be able to drag that and drop that into a prototype, and then I want to just be able to hook that up in my main scene. So you need a way of triggering interactions, and the way ProtoPie does that is with messages. And there's two sides to messages. There's a trigger called send, and then there's a response called receive. So send and receive work together. You need both sides of them to be able to communicate inside and outside of your component. So here you can see I've got this yellow box is my first level component, and you can see here it's sitting inside a scene, and I've got two channels. In fact, let me just show you how that's kind of looking. So when you add, so over here in this right hand panel, this is kind of not an official term, I call it the interaction stack. So this is where you add all your triggers and responses. So I've added a trigger here, receive, and then ProtoPie's asking me like what channel do I want to receive it from, and here I'm receiving from current scene. So there's at this level there's two different channels that I can choose from: receive from component and receive from current scene. I've also got this other one, which is actually looking at a component. So it's receiving from component. So I'm defining the component specifically that I want to get the message from, and then it's sending a message in. So this message here you see is going to receive a message from these two different directions. So if I'm sending a message to the parent, and in some ways, when you think about like an initial component that sits in your scene, parent and current scene kind of sound like the same thing, because they're both sending a message to the same destination. And if I click parent here, you'll see that it's just passed a message from the child component. So this yellow box is a child component of the scene. I can also send a message to the current scene, which again is coming from this child component, but instead of sending it to its parent, it's sending it into the current scene. So whilst they may seem kind of similar at this level, they start to differentiate when you start to create nested components and more complex components. So you can think about the two different ways of doing it in this way. Like this is where I was kind of like thinking about it. Like if you send a message from the parent to the child, you're essentially having a one-to-one conversation, like a private conversation between the parent and the child, because you need to explicitly choose the component. So I've only got one component here in this scene, but you could have a whole bunch of components. You're specifically choosing the component you want to get a message from, and that's a very explicit way of thinking about it. Whereas current scene, you can think of that like a post office, like a notice board in a post office, where everything has access to those messages. They're not private; they're public messages. But they're also kind of anonymous, in the sense that if I receive from current scene, I don't know what component it's come from. I just know that all I know is the message, and you can see here that I'm just kind of receiving this message from the scene. So two different ways, two different channels, and two different aspects that you can use to talk inside and outside of your components. So if we take that a level further, we've actually got all these different mechanisms for sending and receiving messages. So here I've got my scene. Inside of that, I've got my child component, so child to the scene. But inside of that, I've got another component, a nested component. So for this nested component, the yellow box is the parent. And for the yellow box, the scene is the parent. And conversely, the nested component, so the red one, is actually the child component of the yellow box. And then there's also, just to give you even more flexibility, there's also another channel at this level called current component. So that's the ability to send messages inside of a component itself from the component. So at the same level, it's almost like being in a scene and sending a message into the scene. So you can see here that I can send a message from here. So effectively, this red box is actually the grandchild component of the scene. So that's where that's coming from. I can also send a message from well, what is the grandchild for the scene, but the child for this parent component. I can send a message here. So that's it receiving a message internally from the child, so the nested component, into the main component. And then I can also send a message at the component level. So from the current component, I can also send a message into the current component as well. So this allows for some really complex stuff that you can create within ProtoPie. And it may seem quite unwieldy at this point, but as we go through this, I'm going to show you some real world examples, which will hopefully add a little clarity to it. But just know at this point that you can basically send a message from any component to any other component. And that's a really powerful functionality. Finally, just to kind of round off the channels and the messaging, we've also got the ability to send messages down through the hierarchy. So in the previous examples, I was sending it up through the hierarchy. So if you think about a nested component as being the lowest level and the scene being the highest level, so I'm essentially sending messages upward. This is the other way around. So I can send a message from the scene into my child component, and I can do that here. So I'm now sending a message from the parent. I can also send a message from the parent component to its child component, so the nested component. So you can see how we've got this kind of bubbling down of messages, and you might use this, you'll see some examples of this, where you're effectively, you want to be quite explicit about how the component is used. Like you want people to be able to choose the component specifically, and I'll get into later like what the pros and cons are of that. There's a little bit more work when you do this, because effectively you need to daisy chain your messages through the hierarchy. So you're passing it into this component, picking it up here and passing it onwards. So it's a bit like a relay race where you're passing a baton from one runner to another, which you can then start to maybe see the benefits of the current scene, because effectively the current scene allows you to circumvent all of the hierarchy. So if you've got a component that's like nested 4 components deep, and you just want to be able to, you only want to use that component in a scene, you can just use center current scene, and it will bypass all of the nested components. It will just send it directly to the scene, which is less work for you as the person building the components. But like I said previously, there's some things you need to know about what the pros and cons are of doing that. As a fairly trivial example, so I've got 3 colored boxes here. So I've got the yellow box, which has got inside of it the red box, which is a child component. And inside that child component, it's got a purple box, which is a grandchild component. And what I've basically done here is whenever I tap on any one of the colors, it's going to make all the other components the same color as itself. So, and it's using the ability to send messages through the hierarchy to change the colors of the boxes. So if I start by tapping the yellow box, so it's now sent messages through all of those nested components and changed them all to yellow. Similarly, if I click on this top box, it's now passed the original purple color back down. And if I tap on the red box, then it's changing both its parent and its child to its native color. So it's using messages behind the scenes to trigger these interactions, and in this case, it's just the response of changing the colors. So hopefully to give you something a bit more kind of real world, I'm just going to well, I call it live coding, but it's not really coding, live designing, I guess. So I'm going to do a live demo. They can always go horribly wrong, but we'll see how we go. So I'm just going to build a really basic component, and I'm going to show you how you would build this without using ProtoPie components, and then I'm going to show you how it would work when you actually make it a component. So I've got a basic iOS switch here, and I've already imported, I've already pre-created the graphics. So I want to basically create. So at the moment, there's nothing. Let me just hide this for a second. So at the moment, there's nothing going on. It's just basic graphics with no interactions or anything like that. So the first thing I'm going to do is just going to make this switch work. So switches obviously need to slide. So I'm just going to, with my oval selected, I'm just going to add a tap trigger, and I'm just going to move this to another position. So I'm just going to move this to position 22. So that's effectively going to slide the circle from the left side to the right side. As we know with iOS switches, the actual background color changes as well. So I'm going to change the background color by using a color response. I'm just going to choose random color. 100%. Okay, if I bring my preview back, that should just work. So basically we've done 1/2 of a switch just by adding those 2 responses. So that's great, but I want when this switch gets turned on, I want my setting, I want this label which is kind of grayed out. I want it to look not disabled. So I want to make the color of that text black. So if I go and look at that label, it's actually black already. It's at a 30% fill. Actually, let me just change that to 100. I'm going to change the opacity to 30. There's 2 different ways of doing it. So I want to actually, when this happens, I want to change that color. So I'm going to add, with the label selected, I'm going to add an opacity response, and I'm going to turn up the opacity to 100. Okay, so let's review. So I'm going to tap this trigger. It's going to move the circle to the right-hand side. It's going to change the background color of the switch, and it's going to animate the color of the setting label so that it doesn't look disabled. So let's try that out. Cool. So that's all working. So that's how you would do it in a very vanilla way. So now I'm going to do it using components. So the first thing I'm going to do is going to choose my switch, which is a group effectively. This is just this is what you would know in Sketch and Figma just as a group. So when you import stuff from those tools, ProtoPie understands certain constructs, so it understands what a group is, and it will bring it and it will convert it into a ProtoPie group. As it turns out, I actually drew this component completely natively in ProtoPie. I didn't import any graphics. You've got some basic shape tools, really basic shape tools, but you can get quite far with a circle and a square and rounded corners, amazingly, in this era of UI flat design. So I've just created it natively, and the main and like Robert said, to use the color response, you need to have native objects. You can't change the color of imported objects, and that's mainly, or certainly in objects imported via the tool importers. And that the main reason for that is that at the moment, graphics gets imported, they get converted to bitmap. So ProtoPie doesn't support in the importers vector graphics or SVG. You can bring SVG into ProtoPie via the image, or you can copy and paste SVG across, but currently not supported in the importers. Okay, so I'm just going to select this group, and I'm going to convert this to a component. So I can tap this button up here, I can right click, convert to component. And you'll notice as I've done that, all of my responses and triggers have disappeared. So that's now, if I go to this master component, if I look inside, they've now been moved inside of this. And if you're familiar with After Effects, you could probably see this as being very similar to when you make a comp. So effectively, you might have some stuff in After Effects, and when you make it a comp, it basically actually asks you if you want to move everything into the comp, and essentially moves everything into the comp. So it's pretty much what it's doing here. But you'll notice, so I'm currently inside my component. You notice the opacity is orange, and orange means that this response is effectively broken. It's missing some information. And you can see that because I use the layer actually is in my scene. It's not in my components. That's effectively broken. So I can't use this. I can't change the opacity directly from inside of my component to something outside of my component. And this is where messages comes in. This is kind of the backbone of how you make components work. So I'm going to delete that opacity, and I'm going to add a send message. So I'm going to send a message from inside the component. I'm going to send it into the current scene. And messages are just basically text strings. They can be anything you want. They are case sensitive, but you can type whatever you want it to be. So I'm just going to type on, lowercase. So the tap trigger is inside the component, which when you bring a component out into your artboard, it will always find the tap triggers inside of components. So it's going to get tapped internally. It's going to do the same stuff internally. So I've got some stuff going on internally, this moving and color, but to actually make something happen when this switch gets turned on, I need to send this message out. So I'm just going to send out the state that it's turned on. Okay, so I'm going to go back to my scene. So you see this is my switch component. So now I need to receive that message. So I'm going to use the receive trigger. So as I said before, send and receive work together. One doesn't do much without the other. So I'm going to receive a message, and this is important. You've got all those different channels. You need to make sure you match the receive to the send. So I sent a message into the scene. So I need to receive a message from the scene. And so with receive from current scene selected, if I just tap into special C, I get this autocomplete, which is a nice, fairly new feature in ProtoPie. Before, you had to remember what all your messages were, which was quite time consuming and a pain, but really great now that we've got this autocomplete. So I can just choose this from the list. And you'll notice if I actually go to this receive and choose from component, and actually I select my switch component, there's no message in here. And that's because inside of my component, I haven't sent the message to the parent. I've used current scene. So that's another way if you know whether you're getting it right or wrong. If you think you put it to the component, there's nothing in here, then you know you've probably sent it somewhere else. So I'll switch that back to current scene, and I'll choose on. So I've received the message, so now I can add my opacity, and I can add that inside of the scene. and I'm just going to do the same thing as before. You'll see that I didn't select the label by default, so it's asking me to select the layer. So just a quick thing, if you select the layer first and then add your response, it will automatically populate the layer, but you can also find it just in here and you can search and stuff like that. So I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to make this label 100%. Okay, so let's test that. And there you go. So hopefully that gives you a little bit of a look about how you would do slightly components in comparison to how you would do something without using components. Okay. Moving on. So sneak peek time. Do you know, I never get to do design like this, like crappy design. So I really love the opportunity to do any bad design, which that motion design certainly was. So I've been helping out ProtoPie guys at ProtoPie. We've been doing some beta testing. So I'm currently working for Channel 4, and I work on the All 4 app. So that's basically their digital streaming service, and primarily I'm working on the Android platform, so the Android app for All 4. So ProtoPie contacted us to help them beta test some of the new features in ProtoPie 5, which we readily agreed. So we've been testing it. So I'm just going to show you a couple of things. I'm going to show you the new features in ProtoPie 5, and I'm also going to show you a few of the components that I've built for All 4 to give you a bit more of even more of a real world look about how you can really leverage this power in your own projects. So let's have a quick look around. Just going to start with a little demo file. So libraries. So if you're familiar with ProtoPie 4, then you've got this components panel. But at the point which Fredo will talk about later, that ProtoPie 5 launches, you're going to open this panel and you're going to see a whole new panel. So this is really a components panel on steroids. So libraries, which are basically very similar to Figma libraries and Sketch libraries in their concept and in their implementation, but for interaction. So there's some things which will be very familiar to you, and there's some things that will be very specific to interaction, which you don't have in those other kinds of tools. So just to kind of talk through this panel, because there's a lot going on in here. So at the very top, you've got the ability to search and filter for components. You've got the ability to change your panel into a list view, which actually is something I've been waiting for a while, mainly because the really long names, as you see, get truncated. So that's a real help, but search is even better. This icon we've kind of had already. It's the ability to pin the panel so that when you're in your prototype, it's always there. So that's kind of there already. And then we've got this other curious icon, which is basically the ability, the panel which shows you when you've got updates to libraries. So libraries are effectively separate files in almost identical way to Sketch libraries are separate files, and you edit library files and then you attach it to, actually you do it in a kind of different way in ProtoPie, but the same way as they're accessible through your Sketch files libraries, you do the same thing within ProtoPie. So we've got different flavors of libraries. So we've got, the first thing is local components. They're effectively what you've got in ProtoPie 4.3 now. So that's just your component library of old. So you can still have components local to your file. You then got this handy little panel, which is components that are actually used in this ProtoPie file itself. So you can track the components, you can right click, you can go to an instance of a component and it will take you there, and you can do a whole bunch of stuff with components. You've then got the main big one, which is team libraries. So you may or may not be aware that ProtoPie comes in different flavors from the account side of things. So you can have a personal account, you can have a team account, and you can have enterprise account. So this is the team level account. So obviously, if you've got more than one designer, you'd be wanting to have this particular account type. And this allows you to create libraries and share those libraries within your team. So you can see I've created a couple of libraries in here. Next, we've got personal libraries. So as I said, there's this, the kind of the entry level ProtoPie license is for personal libraries. So that's a single designer. So you can create libraries for yourself to use in your own pies, but you can't share those with other designers. Obviously, that's what the team account is, but it still allows you to componentize your work and, you know, give yourself the opportunity to create a design system or a interaction library to increase the speed that you can put prototypes together. And then finally, we've got public libraries. So these are libraries that ProtoPie are shipping with the tool. So we've got a material design UI kit and we've got an iOS UI kit. So these effectively are pre-built components by guys at ProtoPie, which you can use freely in your prototypes. You can try and find our switch. So you've got components that you can use. They're effectively locked off. You can't get into them. You can't go into the component the way you would inside of a component you created yourself. And in fact, when you're in a team account, and this is something that happens in ProtoPie Cloud, as a cloud version of ProtoPie, you can set access rights as well. So you can have people that work on libraries, and you can have other designers which are not allowed to work on libraries if you want to, or you can give those access how you wish. But for public components, they're locked off. You can't get inside of them, but you can use them using the power of messaging, which would have been built into the components themselves. Which leads me nicely on to how the hell do you know what the messages are, and how the hell do I use this component? So over here in the properties panel, we've got another area for components, and you can see here, just zoom that up a little bit, you've got this little icon here. So if I click that, I get this little panel, and this little panel is called a guide panel, and it gives me all the information I need to use this component. So you can see that there's a toggle on message which is being sent to the component, and there's a toggle off message that I can send to the component, and then there's also some receive, so I can receive a message when the component is on.
We can't see the component guide.
Oh, weird. Let me try and open that again. Can you see it now?
Yeah, there you go. Yeah.
Yeah, cool. Okay. Cool. So so the guide gives you all the messages you need to use that component. So we got send messages, and we've got receive messages. So that I would use these the same way as I did inside of my inside of my previous example to be able to use this component. And that's something that you document when you build the components in the library itself. So what else can you do with components? So let me just go to one of my personal libraries. So I'm just gonna, so I've got a really basic library here. I'm just gonna quickly just build a screen. So I've got my title component. I'm just gonna switch this on. Just clear this for a minute. And I'm gonna bring in like a bottom bar. And I'm going to bring in this gesture thing, and you can see that this bar is too long, so I'm just going to bring that in. So you've got constraints built into components as well, so you can add very similar constraints to what you do in Sketch and Figma. It's at that basic level. It's not to the level of real apps, but it's still enough to be able to build flexible components. And I'm just going to bring in a card. I'm going to duplicate that, group those together, and I'm just going to turn that into a scroll container. And you just need to change the size of the scroll container to allow it to scroll. Got a crash on the preview. Let me just beta software. I'll just need to reboot ProtoPie. Just give me a sec. Let me just try it one more time. No. Don't work with children, animals, and beta software. That's what I suggest. Let's just run this again. God, the drama, that was killing me. Right, okay. Let's go back to where we were. Let's just make this always on top. That's better. Okay. Okay, so I've got with my scroll container, you can see that's, I just need to change the ordering of things, stick the container at the bottom so it actually goes underneath the tab bar. So there we go. So, you know, components, really quick to knock a prototype together. But I decided that I don't like this, the color of this component, so I want to change it. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to right click it and I'm going to go to the master component. And what this is going to do, it's going to open the library file in the back. It will come to the fore, but it'll essentially, it's talking to the cloud. It's going to open this library file and it's going to give me access to these components. So I'm just going to go to, I'm already on it. So this is, it's opened it at the right component. So I've got my title bar component. Let's move this out of the way for a second. So I'm just going to change the color to blue. Okay, so I just need to save this component. So you'll see that it's like Sketch. It just puts a little message in the top right-hand corner to saving new changes. And once it's saved, it's told me the changes are saved and it's ready to publish. And you can see you've got this purple bar with this button. So I need to publish it to actually make it available to other team members. And in this case, it's myself with my other Pi file. You've got some basic version control. So I can put a message in here. Let's color to sort of blue. And I'm going to publish that change. So we can see it's published successfully. That's good. So I'm going to go back to my components file and cross my fingers. And have you noticed there's a tiny little blue dot there? So I'm going to click into that and you can see I've actually got this little flashing little red dot here on this curious icon that I mentioned earlier. So if I click on that, I now get the panel where it shows me there's an update to one of the components. So it shows you updates at a component level, not at a library level. So you can choose to selectively update components or you can just update all. So I'm going to update all. Okay, so that's done. And you can see now my component has changed to blue. And if I go back into my library, and you'll see it's blue in here as well. Now, what you actually would have seen if I had this in focus is this would have changed to blue automatically without me having to accept the changes. So library items get updated automatically. Instances, so when you've actually used them in the prototype, that's what you're choosing to update manually. So when you go into this update panel here, this is basically accepting the changes to update components inside of your existing prototype. Okay, so that's the kind of the workflow for prototypes. I've also got the ability to swap components as well. So over again in this detail panel, let's move this over here. So you can see I've got two bottom bars. So I'm just going to switch from bottom bar 1. Yeah. To bottom bar 2. So you see now it's switched components. Just need to change the size of that. So you can switch components out. What I've noticed, the difference I've noticed here between, say, Sketch, for example, is that you can switch a component of any size to another component of any size. So it doesn't have to be the same artboard size to be able to be switched across. And it doesn't constrain the component that you change it to the constraints of the existing component. Okay, so that's kind of the the main features around the libraries and components. So might need to run over a little bit. So let's just move on, have a quick look at all four. So I don't know if you knew this, but you can bring Lottie files into ProtoPie as well. I've got a nice Lottie file of the all four animation self-running here, which is quite cool. So let's go and have a look. So just going to run you through a few examples. So here's two radio buttons. Let's close this down. Let's go into the, so this is the all four library. So you can see, actually I'll do it in this view, it's a bit easier to see. It's quite extensive. It's got 59 components in it. So you could effectively build most of the all four app just by using these components. So as an example, we've got a radio set here. So I've got a radio component and I want those two to talk to each other. So I can basically select one, and then when I select the other one turns off. And that's really easy to do, to set up. So I set up a receive trigger. When I receive from component a selected state, so I've got a selected and unselected state, which I've built into the component, I can then send another message to the other radio button to become unselected. And similarly, I've got a duplicate state that receives the selected state message from radio 1, not the radio music channel. That's kind of weird. And it moves, it sends an unselected state to radio 2. So that's all I need to do to make those components work. So that's really quick and easy to set up. And then obviously, once I've set up these changes, I can add a whole bunch of other responses underneath to make other stuff happen, like we did with the switch showing the label. So that's quite a basic component. On here, I want to show you a slightly bigger component. So in all four, we've got lots of slices. That's what we call them internally. You'd know them as carousels. We call them slices. So I've got basically a hero slice. This is something you would see on the as you logged into the app. So I've just dragged this slice off, and straight away I can just page it. That's all working out of the box. And again, I can edit the internals of this, so I can just drill down into card hero 1. So maybe I want to change the image, and I can just use this replace command, which will allow me to access my file system. And I'm just going to choose another image, let's say catch-22. And that's just updated. And I can go into here, I can go directly into here and actually just live edit the text. Ready to go. So that's another component, a little bit more complex, but it's got some built-in functionality into it. So hopefully you can see how you can start to build these kind of Lego bricks to enable you to really increase the rapidity of your prototyping. Okay, so this is a bit more of a complex component. So this is a search box. So it's got a lot of stuff going on inside of it, but obviously you don't need to know that or need to worry about that when you're using it. So effectively, I'm going to tap on this search field. It's going to invoke this native keyboard. If you had this on a real device, it would invoke the native keyboard and you'd be able to tap on it. You can see here I've got this sneaky little variable debug. So on variables, you've got this little debug icon, which allows you, without spending too much effort setting up a bunch of stuff, seeing of your what's inside of your variable. And Robert showed this in his prototype earlier. So basically, what I need you to know is that because this input because this search field is a component, the input field is actually inside of it, and you can see it inside of here. It's inside of the component, so it has no idea what's going on outside of it. And what I really want is I want that value. When you type something in here, I want that value. So with components, you can actually pass variables from inside the component outside to your scene as well, which is quite crucial when you're passing text around. So I've got a little mapping here where, as you can see, as I'm typing into my input field, it's printing that value directly into my variable. And that's sitting in this variable now, which is outside of the scene. And I can then use that message elsewhere in my prototype, maybe for some personalization or something like that. You can also see that I've handled all the focus and unfocus states and changed icons and stuff. So it's doing a whole lot of subtle different, making the background teal and giving focus and all that sort of jazz. So doing a lot of complicated stuff in there. But to do that, I don't have to do anything actually. I don't even need that. I literally just drag and drop that out, and it just, all that stuff just works. All I would need to do is set up the variable inside of my scene. Okay, so here's something a bit more involved. So kind of a semblance of a view. So I've got a bunch of components here. I've got a dialogue component. I've got some cards, so effectively some slices of some programs that maybe I've added to my All 4 app, and I've got this button, delete all shows. So again, a little bit more work, but still fairly trivial. I've got a tap button that sends a message into my dialogue to send an activate message. That's going to make my dialogue show. And then I've got I just need to set up some actions for my dialogue. So the primary and secondary call to actions inside. I want to receive the primary message. So when I tap on the delete button, I want to basically change the opacity of my cards, which are also components. And I've also set up the cancel, which basically just cancels the dialogue. So let's just run that. So if I hit delete all my shows, I get the dialogue pop up. I can cancel that dialogue, everything goes away. But if I hit delete, my shows are now gone. So that's just showing you how you can use multiple components together to create a view fairly trivially with these components. Okay, so just to wrap up, I'm just going to quickly build the All 4 home screen. I just really want to kind of show you how easy it is once you've got all your components created, how to do this. So I'm going to add actually, let me just come out of that for a sec. Let's go to my app bars, and I'm just going to add a system bar. Actually, I've already got a system bar. That's handy. Don't need that one then. I'm going to add my bottom bars. Effectively, no, thank you. Bottom bar is an Android version of a tab bar, and I'm just going to go and grab my hero component. So I'll go down to my slices. I'm going to grab that hero again that I used earlier. Just going to stick that in place. And then I'm just going to add another, I've got another slice called continue watching. Just going to add that in. And as before, you can easily just kind of change all the internals of that slice. So I can just go to that. Let's go to here. Maybe add a Seinfeld episode into that. There you go. And I can just edit this. And I can just kind of group that together, make that a scrollable view as I did before. Obviously, there's not a lot of content in, so we won't really scroll very far. Now, normally when you use a bottom bar or a tab bar, you want to have your tab selected. So I just need to make that selected. So that's fairly easy to do. So I'm just going to add a start trigger, and a start trigger is a trigger that automatically executes any responses when your scene loads. So when the scene loads, I'm going to send a message. I'm going to send a message to the current scene. And you can see here, I've got a whole bunch of messages. So this is quite interesting because these are all going to the current scene. So you can see if you've got a lot of components or a lot of messages in your components, you can get a really long list of messages. So because messages to this current scene are effectively anonymous, you need to prepend where they're coming from. I certainly need to know, okay, what tab do I want to send this message to? So I want to send it to home. The good thing is that you can, if you want to take this route, so you could easily go the other route where you send it to the child and choose the component first and then choose the message. So that's the way you get like a smaller list of messages, just a few more things you need to choose. or you can do it this way. And as you can see, I can filter. And if you stick to some naming conventions, and as I tend to use like the age-old reverse domain naming convention, start with the most generic thing to the most specific thing. If I just type home, I'll get everything with home. So I just want to basically tell it I want home selected. And you can see instantly my home button is now in the teal, which is the selected state for all 4. Similarly, I can send you probably just saw that, I can send there's another tapped, which I can, if you tap on it, I can then add a response to send you to another scene or whatever I want to do with that. Okay, so one final thing I want to show you is just the cloud. So just to hide this. So the software, which is called ProtoPie, is actually called Studio. That's what we call it. That's one side of ProtoPie. The other side is Cloud, which is obviously a web-based version of your account. So you can see here we've got personal spaces, and this is the Channel 4 space. You can see similar to Abstract and maybe Zeppelin, I can set up, probably more like Abstract, I can set up a project. So I've got projects, and inside of here we've got some obviously some test projects. So that's your actual pies. But you also will see, I want to draw your attention to libraries is unlike some of the other tools. Libraries sits outside of projects. So as you add libraries, and you can control the access to a level, everybody in your team will have access to all of those libraries. So they're not connected to a project like you might have inside of Abstract, for example. So, and you can archive projects, you can set user roles to projects as well. So there's a bunch of stuff that you can do inside of here. Obviously you need to have a team account for this. If you're going to do the access roles and add users and things like that, this is kind of how you kind of manage your projects and all of the, if I just go inside of this design system, inside of these projects, you can see this is where my prototype is. So I can actually send a link out from here. This is all kind of existing pre-5 functionality, but I've also got my version control here, which obviously there's not a lot in this one. We just go quickly to the library, and we'll just go into the library file, and I go into version history. You can see all my version history is here. As I've made changes, I can see all that version history, and I can also see all of my components as well. At the moment, can't really do anything beyond this. Can't really go into a detailed view of a component or do anything specific with it, but it's a good reference of the components that I've got. And I've got the ability to open up the library file from here. And you can see here where I can add members. So you can manage all your members who have access to this file here. So I think that's it from me. That's a bit of a whirlwind tour through components and through ProtoPie 5's new library feature. Yeah, that's it. I'm done. Look forward to some questions.
Thanks, Darren. That was a really interesting talk, and I think you did a really good job of going through and doing a live demo without any hiccups along the way. It's a good job.
Just one.
You always have to have one, of course.
I put that in on purpose.
So just to mention, if people have questions, and we can start populating the QA section. But first, we'll jump to opening up a conversation with Fredo, who works for ProtoPie, and he is head of growth, I think. And so, Fredo, if you just quickly introduce yourself for people who don't know who you are, and then we'll maybe have a chat about how things are going at ProtoPie.
Yeah. Nice to meet all of you. I think I see a lot of familiar names, so I think most of the people have probably seen my name somewhere. So I work as the head of growth at ProtoPie, and responsible for anything marketing related, as well as product related. I'm also deep into product, not as a designer, but more working as a UX writer. And
I've seen a bunch of your tutorials as well.
Yeah,
very great as well.
I've been doing that as well.
Any more of those coming?
Yes, definitely more tutorial videos coming up. This time not made by me. As our team is growing, we have other people for that. Yeah, so thank you both Robert and Darren for your amazing demos. And so ProtoPie 5.0 will include interaction libraries, but that's only one half of the update basically. The other one would be interaction handoff. So ProtoPie 5.0 is going to include both handoff as well as libraries. And unfortunately, I can't show anything yet involving handoff, but it's going to be very different than what you're probably used to from other tools. We're not focusing on code export, but we focus on the designer's intent and all the interaction values that you're familiar with inside ProtoPie that you have in one clear overview that you can pass to your developers. So that's going to be ProtoPie 5.0. The other good news is that you don't have to wait long. We're aiming for release early next week. And if everything goes well, it should be available on Monday already, actually.
Nice. So the team have been working around the clock to get that out for.
Yes, yes, they are probably some of the engineers are probably working right now, fixing all the bugs that Darren has been reporting. So yeah, we're getting everything ready, working around the clock, both interaction libraries and handoff, and as well as our new ProtoPie website. So everything is scheduled for Monday. Yeah.
Oh, cool. What can we expect on the new website? I think maybe if it was the first or the second meetup, there was some talk about some more demos or some community stuff. Is there anything you can talk about there?
Yeah, so in the long term, we'd like to add a lot more tutorial content, a lot more onboarding documentation for new users, as well as content on how to use some of the advanced features that ProtoPie has as well. Community part, I think as well in the long term. I'm not sure for this first release on Monday. And yes, new examples, more prototypes, and just for us internally, it's going to be a lot easier for us to update our website. So that's why also a big reason why we're revamping the website.
Cool. So we got a message here from Anonymous, which says, when you create a start response and you're looking for a message from a specific component, do you think it would be helpful if we could organize the drop-down list by adding the component titles as dividers? So that's a very specific, I guess, request, really. I think we have a voting system, right? Or you guys have a voting system for adding in feature requests? Freddie, do you want to just quickly talk about that?
Sorry, could you repeat the question, Chris? Just the
around,
last part you mentioned.
Yeah. Well, the question is like, there's a voting system for people who are requesting new features and functionality. So I think that kind of falls under that. So from a specific component perspective, would it be helpful to organize this in a certain drop down or whatever? I guess my point is that you can submit that to you guys, and then it can be upvoted by the community, right. And then you guys build and respond to that.
Exactly. We're very user feedback driven. We have a special platform where we organize all the feature requests that we get from users like yourselves, and based on what we receive from all of you, we pick what features we like to focus on. So yeah, it's indeed like Darren said, it's protopie.canny.io. So just leave it there and make sure to vote for the ones that you like to see implemented. Yeah.
Sweet. Cool. I have a question actually for Robert. I was just wondering, how long have you been using ProtoPie and what tools have you used before? I quite like to ask people who have been using ProtoPie what have they been using in the past.
So I started using Flinto at first, which was the easiest tool I can find to prototype my ideas. But in fact, it didn't help me because I was working in a fintech company at that time, and I really needed a tool that has a bit of logic, that deals with numbers and formulas. So I was in a search for that tool, and just ProtoPie popped up. I really liked, it's been around 1.5 years, 2 years I've been using ProtoPie. I think I find it really easy for, if anyone like first time user, they can just create any kind of prototype easily on it. In fact, there are many other prototyping tools in the market which are really hard and have a learning curve. ProtoPie's learning curve is really short, and it's let's say worth the try. Sometimes you can like try prototyping tools and spend like 2-3 weeks and like waste your time not learning anything, but on using ProtoPie you can just get your anything that you're willing to do can be done on ProtoPie. I think they cover most of the cases in the app web market.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. Cool. Let's jump into another question. It says, so we've got another question here. It says, if you want to create a library, do you start creating from a ProtoPie file? I guess the answer to that is yes, but I'll add to that. I guess for public libraries, I'm kind of interested. Are you guys at ProtoPie managing that? How do you get a library into the public libraries? How does that work?
Yeah, so the public libraries, those are indeed made by us and published by us, and so those are, you can see them as default libraries. Yeah, basically.
So would there be a way for third parties to submit them and share them?
That's actually we haven't thought about that, but I think that would definitely be the most logical step for us to take after releasing 5.0 for sure.
Cool. That'll be interesting to see how that that develops. I think
just to talk about like how you make libraries. There's different ways you can do it. So you can import. So certainly from 4.3, you will be able to import an existing Pi file of components and turn that into a library. You can also just create a new library and start adding components to it as well. And you can also copy and paste components from files into library files. So there's a lot of different ways you can do, you can approach the creation of libraries.
Cool. I think there's another question here about the public libraries, around if you've been using a component from that library and it gets updated, will it automatically, will ProtoPie create a system where you can manage the newer updates to avoid breaking your existing prototypes? Maybe Darren, I don't know if you're familiar with that question there. Like if there's changes to public libraries or I guess even team libraries, we saw the notification icon flashing in the left-hand column and then up on the right as well. So I guess does that answer the question, that you can accept or decline those updates to?
Yeah. So you only so as I said, so if you make an update to a library component, you're not using your prototype, it will just update automatically. But if you've already dragged an instance out and you're using it in your prototype, it's going to ask you to manually accept or not decline, but accept those changes. So you can accept those changes at a component level. What you don't really have at the moment is any way of seeing like what's changed, and there's no way at the moment of from a documentation perspective of kind of like communicating to the designer what has changed. I'm afraid maybe can pick up and give some more clarity to that at the moment, but effectively it works the same as Sketch, that in the sense of it will tell you a component as updated, but unlike Sketch, for example, it won't show you a side by side, so you can't see visually what's changed at the moment.
Cool, thanks, Darren. We've got a message here that says, thanks for a very useful session. It was a bit difficult to follow, so this person's looking for, I think, Robert's file. Robert, you said you were going to share
Yeah.
that.
Yeah, I just shared it in the chat.
Cool. And we can reshare that on the meetup group as well.
Yeah.
And we are recording this as well. So if anyone's following and they want to go back, they can do that. Or if they want to share the session, if they think it's been useful and it might be useful for other people, then they can go ahead and share that. Here we've got a message from Stefan. Hey, Stefan, he's been with us through all of the meetups. He did a talk on our last session. So which platforms, iOS, Android, for phone will have public libraries? Anything else? Will there be iOS and Android phones or other devices to be supported? So this is public libraries. Are there going to be anything other than iOS and Android? Fredo, are you just going to be rolling out?
Yeah, so when releasing next week, we will first have the iOS UI kit as well as the material design UI kit. Of course, in the long term, eventually you would like to have a lot more public libraries as well. Yeah.
I just have a question. For the public libraries, we will give like access to people to create libraries and publish them on like store type of thing, or is that something in the plan, or
yeah, so I think a possible store would be very interesting for us to look into as a next step after releasing interaction libraries. I think for now it would make more sense if people who are interested make libraries that we could possibly add as a public library for anyone to access. Yeah.
Cool.
So we have a question here around if there's going to be any other examples for the send and receive functionality on the ProtoPie website, especially the part where you can assign it to a variable. So I guess this person's just looking for more demos or examples of send and receive. There will be more.
Well, I think we should. So I'll talk to Darren. Maybe he has a few examples that we can add to the website.
Cool.
Yeah, I'll be doing some videos on components on my YouTube channel. So plug. Just go and subscribe if you want to get tutorials on that. But I'm going to be focused for the next couple of weeks after the release on components. I think it's really interesting. I mean, the component, how you build components is not a 5 thing. It's a 4 thing. It's already there. Obviously, it's the library aspect which has been added to it. But yeah, there are some complexities within components, and there's also like a lot of, whether it's coding or design, it's like there's an art to it as well. There's lots of different ways of solving the problem, and lots of different ways of building components. And so there's a certain element. I mean, I got some questions about like, should I use current scene or parent and child? And there's definitely pros and cons and different use cases, more than pros and cons. There's different use cases of why you would use one way and why would you use another way. And in the tab bar component I actually originally had it as a parent-child thing, and then I switched it to go to the current scene because it just cut down on like one step for the designer to actually have to choose something from a drop down and then choose the component. But yeah, it's kind of a fine line. I think it's about designing them out and using them and find out what works for you. But yeah, there'll definitely be some tutorials on the channel over the coming weeks.
Cool. Thanks, Darren. No more questions here. I'm going to ask one of my own because I'm curious. Fredo, this is for you and about ProtoPie. I've seen you guys are recruiting for a UX researcher. So if anyone here knows of any UX researchers, you can maybe send them to Fredo and the team. But I see that the request was based in San Francisco. So but I know you guys are obviously based in South Korea. So could you tell me like how come that is? Are you looking to have someone based in San Francisco to be obviously doing research, UX research?
Yeah, so the initial idea is to have someone who is based in that area. So it will be a lot easier for us as a company to do research on location. Mm-hmm. So that's actually the main reason. but it's not a hard requirement for someone to be actually in that area. I mean, if it's in the US or the West Coast, yes, that would definitely be easier for us. So that's kind of the thought behind it. I mean, in the long term, if possible, we'd love to open up shop there. You know, if things keep going well. But yeah, for now, we're most of our team members are in Seoul, South Korea. We do have a few team members who are based in Seattle, but they're more working on the sales side.
Okay. Cool. We've come up to towards the end of our specified time, so we've just done an hour and a half. I think it's been a really great session. Thanks, Robert. Your talk was great. Nice to meet you. Cheers, Darren. Check out Darren's ProtoPilot YouTube channel. I've been following along the tutorials. I can definitely recommend them. They're kind of they're really great. Fredo, it's very early your time, so thanks. We appreciate you coming in, joining us in the early hours.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Thanks, Fredo.
Yeah, and I guess we'll leave it there. If you guys have enjoyed it and you want to share, talk about ProtoPie, give us a shout out. You can go ahead and do that. We'd like to get some more members in, talking about ProtoPie and sharing. So let's leave it there. Unless anyone has anything else to add, we'll call it a day. Bang on time. 7:30.
Nice. Thanks all.
Cool.
All right, thank you.
Goodbye, guys.
Okay.
Thank you.
See you later.
Bye.
Bye.